Man, it's a great question. What was Jesus like? If you've not met Daniel Boyette, he says Jesus is like me. So just throwing that out there, because Daniel's, he's never wrong. Hey, we are now in the fourth week of this series, and we're looking at these questions. And the thing we have to start with every time is that these questions don't come out of a vacuum, right? There's a setting, there's a context, there's something that's happening here that really does inform the question and why it's asked, and really kind of allows us to understand how it applies to us. What does this mean to us? Like, it's great to have this information, but how does this affect our Monday, right? What does this do to our Tuesday? That's what we're talking about. So let's kind of set the stage here. We are actually going to be in the book of Matthew, starting in chapter 17. And if you're not familiar with the Bible, and hopefully there's one near you at a hardback blue Bible underneath the rack, or in the rack at your the seat in front of you. You can pull that out, or you can use your phone or whatever. And you may not be aware. So the Bible is two major sections: the Old and the New Testament. Matthew's the first book of the New Testament. So if you're new to navigating the Bible, about 2/3 of the way over, then it's right there. Look for Matthew. Usually it's the top of the page. And then the numbers might be confusing to you. What are the numbers all about? Well, the numbers, of course, are chapter numbers and verse numbers. And so think about it like latitude and longitude. You put those two numbers together, you get a point, and it allows you to navigate it. That's what the numbers are there for. So you have the name of the book, and then you have the chapter and the verse, and then you come put them together, and that's where you're going to start. So we are starting in Matthew chapter 17, starting in verse 14. You can kind of go turn there and put your finger there, but let me kind of lay out what's happening here. Immediately preceding this moment, Jesus is gone to the top of a mountain. Right? He's taken 3 of his closest disciples, and they've gone to the top of the mountain. And this is a moment that is called the Transfiguration. I know it's a kind of a big, weird word, but it's a very powerful, spiritual, supernatural moment that occurs on the top of this mountain. And so really you could say Jesus and these disciples, they literally have a mountaintop experience. You've heard that phrase before, a mountaintop experience? We get that from the Bible because God tends to meet with people on the top of a mountain. And when God meets with you on the top of a mountain, it's a life-changing moment. It's a powerful, emotional, spiritual moment. So Jesus and his disciples have a mountaintop experience. Now the thing is, you kind of want to stay there. Right? Even Peter, when they have it, Peter's like, we could build shelters. We could just stay here. We don't have to leave here. We want to stay right here because this is where it's at. And Jesus says, no, we got to go back down. See, mountaintop experiences are powerful, and they are spiritual, and they're memorable, but they're always temporary. You don't get to stay at the top of the mountain. They're important to us, but that's not where the work is done. And Jesus knows that. So he's coming back down off the mountain. So these disciples and Jesus are coming down off of this really powerful moment. And it says immediately, verse 14, when they came to the crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. Lord, have mercy on my son, he said. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. Here's what's interesting to me. While they are away, they are given this very brief, very temporary glimpse of how things should be, right? That's a mountaintop experience, right? God shows up and just, man, this is how the world should work. This is who I should be. This is how God is. And everything is right in the world in that mountaintop experience. But like I said, on this side of eternity, those experiences don't last. So they're coming down off the mountain, and the instant they come down off of that mountaintop experience, they are met with a difficult, ugly reminder of just how broken and dysfunctional and painful this world really is. And how difficult it is to do anything about it. Because look at verse 16. He says, I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. Lord, have mercy on my son. He has these seizures. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. There's so much packed into that one statement. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him. It tells us that number one, even though Jesus was not present with them, the Father, interestingly enough, still recognizes the disciples as the disciples of Jesus, right? Now, that's cool in and of itself, but I want you to just think about this. When he says, I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him, what that means is he still asked something of them because of who they were and who they followed, which meant not only did he recognize them, but because they were followers of Jesus, he had an expectation of them. He expected them to be able to help him. And the disciples attempted to help them. That's what it says. They brought him, but they could not heal him, which implies they attempted, they tried, but they were unsuccessful. But it also tells us about the persistence of the Father. I guarantee you, just from what we read in this one little moment, right? This is all we know about this man and his son. But it's enough to tell us that this is a father, like any good father, who has a child who suffers in this way. I mean, he is going to turn over heaven and earth, right? He's going to look under every rock, trying to find some kind of cure, some kind of treatment for his son. And the father knows, right? It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to him because he knows that he is the buffer right now. He's the provider, he's the protector. And this world in the first century was harsh on those who suffered from any kind of disability or brokenness or dysfunction, right? It was very difficult to survive in this world. And the father knows, man, when I'm gone, there's not going to be anyone to provide or protect my son. His son will probably be pushed to the edges, to the periphery of society. He'll probably be forced to beg for his existence. Kind of like Bartimaeus last week. We talked about Bartimaeus, the blind man who was healed. That's the future of the son. You imagine as a parent, as a father, you look at your son and there's no hope for them. Right? There's no future. Tomorrow isn't going to get any better than today is. How heartbreaking that is. Right? I look at my kids and their gifts and their abilities and their talents, and I'm so excited about their futures. That father doesn't get that luxury because this son has no future. And so I guarantee you, he's gone searching for any kind of healing he could find. And even though he shows up and he recognizes the disciples and he asks them to help, and even though they fail him, even though they disappoint him, he still stays. He's still persistent. He still waits until Jesus shows up. It's a really good reminder. It's a good reminder, especially for those of you, whether you're in this room or whether you're watching with us online, and you are taking your first tentative steps in investigating, understanding, just kind of trying to seek out what is Christianity all about, right? You're taking your first tentative steps towards faith. You just want to know more. You haven't made up your mind yet, but you're wanting to find out some more. Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe that's why you've tuned in with us online. Something I want you to understand. Let me speak now to you on behalf of all of us who call ourselves believers. We don't want to, but we are going to disappoint you. Right? There are going to be times which we are not going to be able to come through for you like you would want us to. That we will not live up to the expectations you will have of us as believers. Like those disciples did not live up to the expectations of that father. And here's what I'll say. Listen, I'm not trying to excuse us, right? There's a lot of things that we do that are going to bring this on ourselves. We are going to disappoint you, and I wish it weren't so. But as much as we will disappoint you, what this reminds us is that Jesus never will. And if you're looking to us, right, I hope you do see Jesus in us. But in a lot of ways, we're just as flawed and broken, and we're trying to figure it out ourselves. And we want to be different. We're trying to be different. We're trying to grow. But what we've all learned, and the reason we're followers of Jesus is because he's proven himself to us. He's good to us, and we put our faith in him because he never let us down. And that's what we'd say to you. He'll never let you down. He always comes through, which he does here. But here's what's also interesting in this story. Jesus doesn't just come through. Jesus sometimes gets mad. And Jesus gets really mad now. Look at what he says. He says, "You unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you?" Jesus has become a parent of a middle schooler automatically, right? Like, how long? Oh my gosh, how much longer do we have to do this, right? And we look at it and go, man, that Jesus said that's not very Christian. No, but that's exactly what he does. That's what he says, right? There's an old hymn that says, "Gentle Jesus, meek and mild." No, sometimes Jesus gets angry. Jesus gets frustrated. Sometimes Jesus goes hard in the paint. And this is exactly what he does right here, right? He rolls up his sleeves and he goes to work. And he says, bring the boy here to me. And it says in verse 18, Jesus rebukes the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed from that moment. Let me just stop for a moment. I've said this before, but whenever we face a situation like this, I think it's always important to mention how Jesus deals with healings and the healings of Jesus. Because I know some of you, you're watching online, you're here in the room, and this is a point of contention. This something like this kind of trips you up. Because you look at the Bible and you're like, man, I don't know if I can trust the Bible. I don't know if I can trust these words, because what I see here is I see superstitious people who've taken scientific things and they kind of labeled it with a supernatural or spiritual, category. And so they there's an assumption that everything that you and I, because of our science and our understanding and our medicine today, that we can diagnose as a condition, a physical condition, that in that world, they just chalked it up to demonic activity, and that Jesus, so clearly you're saying, well, this kid has some sort of version of epilepsy or some kind of thing that causes seizures, and they're calling it a demon. Here's what I would say to that, okay? When you look through the healings of Jesus, there are times in which Jesus does confront a supernatural problem. And when he confronts a supernatural problem, he offers a supernatural solution. But there are also plenty of times, and last week is a great example of it, when he confronts a spiritual problem, a spiritual disability, or I'm getting confused. But maybe take a step back. He confronts a physical problem, okay? Physical. A physical problem, a physical disability, or a physical disease. And his solution to that is to heal that disease, that problem, or that disability. So he deals with these things in two different ways. So the Bible doesn't lump, don't assume the Bible lumps all disease into the demonic category. All right, when it's supernatural, he deals with it in a supernatural way. When it's physical, he deals with it in a physical way. But he still does it supernaturally, right? He supernaturally heals, but he heals the disease. He goes for the disease, not the demonic. So I just want you to consider that, right? So the Bible is much more balanced in that than a lot of people realize, and I think it's worth another look. So that's exactly what it does here. He correctly diagnoses that the kid's problem is not just purely physical. It's not a disability. It's not a disease. That there is a supernatural, demonic, spiritual problem here, and that's probably why he has success, because he gets to the heart of it, right? So he looks at this kid. In this particular case, he identifies the issue as being spiritual, and so he offers this spiritual solution. It says he rebukes the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed at that moment. Now, that's the end of the story for the Father and the Son. And they go home celebrating, they go home excited, right? Now the Son has a life, he has a future. He can enter society, right? He can marry, he can have kids, he can have a job. He's not going to be forced to live on the side of the road and beg for his existence day after day when the Father is gone. Can you imagine the weight that has been lifted from these two as you kind of watch them walk away going down the road, but the story's not over. Because then we get to verse 19, and it says, then the disciples came to Jesus in private, and they asked the question, and here's our question today. We've been working to get to this moment. They asked the question, why couldn't we drive it out? And I love what it says. They come to him in private. You know why? Because they are embarrassed. They are confused. Their egos have been bruised. Let me tell you why they're so confused and why they're embarrassed. Because several chapters earlier, in fact, in Matthew chapter 10, so we're talking about 7 chapters before this moment. In Matthew chapter 10, I'm going to show you the verses on the screen so you don't have to feel like you got to turn there. Matthew chapter 10, it says, Jesus called his 12 disciples to him. Listen, he gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. So he has given them the authority to do this very thing. And then in Mark's version of the events, Mark adds to this. He says, they drove out many demons and anointed many sick people with oil and healed them. Again, you see the difference there, right? They're seeing the problems that they are facing and they are encountering are both spiritual and physical. And Jesus has given them the authority to deal with both categories, and they've gone out and they've actually done it. So, think about it. When the Father comes to when the Father comes to Jesus with his Son, and he says, man, I'm getting the story all messed up. When the Father comes to the disciples, don't listen to me, just read the verse, okay? When the Father comes to the disciples with his Son, and he says, can you heal my son, right? In their minds, like, absolutely we can heal. We've done this, right? They have no problem with this. Why? Because they've been given the authority, and they have a personal history of doing this very thing. So, can you now imagine the looks on their faces, the confusion, the embarrassment? When the Father puts the Son right there in front of them, they circle up around him. I'm just imagining this. They lay hands on him. They pray for him. They say amen. They back up like, problem solved. Congratulations. Aren't you lucky you saw us here today, right? And then a seizure takes hold, and the body of the boy contorts and twists and falls to the ground. And they're like, what? That's not supposed to happen. That's not how this is supposed to go. And so the minute they're alone with Jesus, they come to him and they ask the question, why couldn't we drive it out? Now, at first, right, on the face of it, you might read this and you might think, well, I don't really have much in common with the disciples or with their question, because I don't have that problem. I've never attempted an exorcism. So, how does this apply to me? Well, chances are you really have asked this question, and chances are it might be a reason for some of you that you're even here today, because you're asking this question. Now, you may not be wondering about your sudden inability to successfully deal with demonic activity, but you are asking this question, only you're doing it in a different way. And the way you're asking this question is this. It's, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working for me? And it doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or a non-Christian. You're both asking this question. Let's talk to the Christians first in the room, okay? For those of you who are Christians, you're asking this question, and you're suffering with this question both in silence and in isolation. And let me tell you why. It's because you have this picture, and I may be at fault for this, right? And I own this. But you may have this picture of what a Christian looks like, how a Christian should act like, how a Christian should behave, how a Christian should talk. You know, you have this idea of what a Christian should be. And maybe it comes from some of the things I've said. And then you go to your home and you get in front of your mirror and you're like, man, I don't see that Christian. And maybe even you feel like you've been sold a bill of goods, right? That just didn't come through for you. Like, hey, if you follow Jesus, here's all the things that, you know, and all this and that. And we say a lot around here, right? Why do we follow Jesus? Because Jesus makes life better and he makes us better at life. Now, we're always very clear with that, right? You're like, my life's not any better. I still have a disease. I still have a broken marriage. I get that, right? We're not saying Jesus makes life easier. We'll never make that promise. Jesus doesn't make life easier, but he makes life better even in the hard times. That's what we're saying. But sometimes we still think, man, because I'm following Jesus, right? Why isn't this working for me? My relationships are still broken. I'm still frustrated. I'm still discouraged. I'm still addicted. Whatever that is, right? You thought that if I just followed him, right? If I just put hitch my wagon to Jesus, right? And I show up every week and I read the scripture and I pray the prayers and I sing the songs and I serve in the nursery and I, give my money, that it's all going to work out for me. And it's not. It's just not. And you're frustrated with your faith. And you're looking and you're being very honest with yourself, but nobody else, but you're being honest with yourself saying, why isn't this working? Why isn't God coming through for me like I think he should be? Or why isn't my Christianity, why am I still struggling? Why am I still hurting? Why am I still addicted? Why are my relationships still a mess? Why isn't this working for me? Really, that's what you're asking. Now, those of you who are not Christians, right? You're asking the same question, but you're asking kind of in a little bit different way. And so you're not so much frustrated with your faith as you're frustrated with your life. And you're like, I'm a good person, I'm a moral person, right? You kind of subscribe to the whole idea of karma, and like, I'm good, I'm good, I'm moral, I treat people right. Why is it that my life is falling apart? Why am I still the one suffering? Why is my disease returned? Why is my marriage on the rocks? Why do my kids act that way, right? And I'm frustrated with life. So why isn't my life working? Some are asking, why isn't my faith working? Some of you are asking, why isn't my life working? And Jesus replies, and the answer for both categories is the same. And on the surface, listen, it's going to sound super simplistic and almost dismissive, but don't dismiss it. Give me a moment to unpack it. Jesus replied, the problem with both either your frustration with your faith or your frustration with your life is that you have so little faith. That's your problem. You have so little faith. What does he mean by that? Okay, let's go back and look at what he said in verse 17. Remember when the father says, hey, can you heal my son? And Jesus gets angry. He says, you unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? That's pretty serious language. That's really harsh language. And one of the things he says is, you are unbelieving. Now, who is he talking to? He's not talking to the unbelieving world. He's talking to his disciples. Now, if you look at the evidence, who are these guys and what are they doing? Are these disciples, are they in the process of deconstructing their faith? No. Had their doubts and their skepticism finally pushed them over the edge to the point at which they actually decided to walk away from their faith in Jesus? No. No, in fact, they didn't leave the base of that mountain even when he left them to go to the top of the mountain. In fact, just the opposite. They stayed, they waited. They were waiting on him. And then when the Father approached them, they actually attempted to do some ministry. They wanted to help the boy and the father, I assume, by praying over him. So you look at this, there's no evidence that these disciples had crossed the line from belief over to unbelief. But he still describes them as being unbelieving. Why is that? Well, here's what I think it is. Remember I told you from verse 16. Verse 16 implies that they attempted something and the result was nothing, right? Which tells me what? Tells us what? It tells us this. It tells us they did what they were supposed to do. They did exactly what they were expected to do. They did what they had been instructed to do and what they had done in the past. Only this time it didn't work because this time something was missing. And according to Jesus, what was missing in this instance was not action, but it was faith. See, what had happened to them is what happens to a lot of believers. It's something that I think we are all on this side of eternity, we're all going to struggle with. It's something you're going to struggle with. It's something I'm going to struggle with that we have to be on our guard against. And it's this. It's that even though we have put our faith in Jesus, our default setting for every one of us, our default setting is for our faith to be in us, in ourselves. Right? Now, I know there's a million other religions out there, but really, generally, if you take all the other religions of the world and you hold it up against Christianity, every other religion, even though you package it as a religion and you dress it up as a religion, when you get to the heart of all those other religions, what are they? They are faith in yourself, faith in your own righteousness, faith in your own works, faith in your own morality, faith in your own ability, faith in your own accomplishments, faith in your own achievements, faith in your own salvation. You work for your faith. And you can dress it up as any religion and call it any religion you want, but the heart of it is faith in yourself because that's our default. That's why they are so appealing to so many people, because that is our default setting, is faith in ourselves. We want to trust ourselves. It's toxic individuality and autonomy. And that's what we do. We always drift back to that. So yes, in our past as Christians, my life, your life, we have a moment in our past where we have put our faith in him. We stopped trusting in our ability, in our righteousness, in our works, and we trusted in the work that Jesus accomplished on our behalf through the cross and through his death and through his resurrection. We say, I trust that. All that work there, accomplished all that I'm trying to accomplish, and I stop trusting in what I can do, and I trust in what he has done. And even though I have done that, and even though many of you in here and on the line, you've done that, the natural draw is going to be us to slip back into, drift back into trusting ourselves. And what happens, what does that look like when we do? We go through the motions of our faith, right? We go through the motions of our religion. We go through the routine. We act like we're supposed to act. We behave like we're supposed to behave. We say the words we're supposed to say. We pray the prayers we're supposed to pray. We sing the songs we're supposed to sing. But we don't really believe it. And when I say I don't really believe it, what I mean is we kind of act it out, but there's no real faith animating it. There's no true expectation behind it. And what this reminds us is this: it's possible, it's so possible, listen, and it's so dangerous for us to be religiously active, but not be spiritually engaged. And that's where we slip up. That's where we fail. And when it happens, what happens? We just go through the motions. We cross the T's, we dot the I's, we show up every Sunday, and we just get stuck in the routine of our religion. Okay? So, he says, you're unbelieving. What happens when you just go through the motions? Jesus says that's the equivalent of being an unbeliever. And he's talking in strong language because he's trying, again, what does Jesus often do? He wants to be jarring. He wants to get our attention. And that's what he's doing here. He's saying, listen, when you just go through the motions, but you don't have really the faith behind it to animate it, then it's just like you're just pretending. And that's unbelief. I love how Paul says it, and Paul writes a book to his young student, his young disciple, Timothy, and he says, talking about people in the last, what he calls the last days, he says, in the last days, people are going to have an appearance of godliness, but denying its power. An appearance of godliness. A lot of people, it's the appearance of godliness, it's the appearance of religion, it's the appearance of morality, but there's no power in it. So he describes this as unbelief, and he doesn't stop there. He piles on. He says, this unbelief is perverse. You are unbelieving in a perverse generation. What does that mean, perverse? Well, a lot of times we think of perversion as a sexual deviance. But in this way, the word there, as I've read, it has to do with pottery. Like, so if you create a piece, a lamp or a vase or a bowl, pottery is very fragile. Even when it's finished, it's fragile, but the process of creating the thing is a very fragile process. And if any moment that bowl or lamp or pitcher, if it becomes chipped or cracked or even broken to the point at which it cannot hold water, it cannot function, it cannot be used, then the potter says it's useless and it throws it on the pile. Perversion means, in this sense, it means to be useless, which you put these two things together when you just, like for the disciples, when you just go through the motions, when you do what you're expected to do and act how you're expected to act without any real faith behind it, then you're useless. You look good, you look great, but when it comes to what Jesus is trying to do and what he wants to do in the world, there's no power in it. We're useless. That's why he says you are unbelieving and you are perverse. I was thinking about this, and I remember a story. A friend of mine from high school came into the locker room one day and just laughing. He's telling this story about his sister. And he said his mom told him before she left, you have to vacuum the floor. And it's just like, yeah, she got it. So he says she gets the vacuum out, and she plugs it in, and she gets it ready, and then she pulls out her Walkman, okay? For those of you who are unfamiliar with what a Walkman is, it's a little tape player, a little cassette tape, physical tape that had music on it, and you put it in the thing, and you put your headphones in, and it's the reason all of us Gen Xers, that and Def Leppard Pyromania, we all have tinnitus now because of the Walkman and all the music we listen to. So she put her Walkman in, and she started vacuuming the floor. Well, my friend walks in. And he describes the scene. His sister's vacuuming the floor. He can hear the music. It's kind of so loud. He can hear the music coming out of the headphones. But he said the vacuum was totally silent. Because at some point it was so loud, at some point she knocked the plug out of the wall, didn't even realize it, and just kept vacuuming the floor, listening to her music. And he was rolling, we were all laughing. And I remember what he said. He goes, she was making lines, but she was doing nothing. And I think it's us, right? When that happens to us, what do? We make lines in the carpet, but we don't accomplish anything because there's no power in it. It says you are unbelieving and you are perverse. And really, that's the thing. That's the answer for both the believer and the unbeliever. And so Jesus says, here's the solution, right? He says, your problem is you have so little faith, right? And so the problem is a lack of faith. Well, then logically, it stands to reason that the solution is just to have faith or to have more faith, right? Not exactly. I want you to look at what he says, because this is a verse we kind of know, but we never really played with, we never really understood, and we've misinterpreted it a lot. So look what Jesus says next. He says, your problem is you have so little faith. And then he says, truly, I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. So we assume that the point is that the disciples, right? Our assumption is the disciples, the problem with the disciples is that they had no faith, and all they needed to do, right? The solution to your problem, the solution to mine, is just to muster up just a mustard seed's worth of faith. Right? That's all we have to do. But when the disciples said, why isn't this working? I want you to notice what Jesus said was, what he didn't say was, your problem, guys, is that you have no faith. What Jesus actually said was, it's because you have so little faith. And remember, we've already established these guys had faith, and they had faith enough to stay around, right? They didn't cross over into pure unbelief. And so he says, you have so little faith. So the problem is that their faith was too small, which meant they needed to increase their faith, right? Not really. Because he said, if you'll remember, that the solution is if you have faith as small as a mustard seed. Now, you put those two things together. Here's what Jesus seems to be saying. Like, Jesus is saying to the guys, listen, your problem is, here's your problem. You have just a little bit of faith. That's your problem. But it's okay, because your solution is you need just a little bit of faith. Pardon me? What? That's not confusing at all. No, let me say it again, just so you're clear. You have just a little bit of faith. So what you need as a solution is just a little bit of faith. What? How do we play this out? Logically, how does this make sense? What this means is the problem that they had, and a lot of us have, their problem wasn't an absolute lack of faith. Their problem actually wasn't even the quantity of faith as much as it was the quality of their faith. Because I think what Jesus is saying here is just your problem is just a little bit of faith and your solution is a little bit of faith. What he means by that is it's not how much faith you have, it's where that faith has been placed. The problem with the disciples wasn't an absolute lack of faith, it was the location of their faith. So the question is what were they actually trusting in? If their faith had been misappropriated, if their faith had been misplaced, then where was their faith? Well, they told us. They don't even know it, but they admitted it to us. Look back at verse 19. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private, and what do they ask? Why couldn't, what did they say? We drive it out. And in that, they just kind of opened their hearts, and they didn't even realize it. They just confessed. What had they done? They had put their faith in themselves, right? Remember, I told you that's the drift. That's where we always end up. It's either, if you're an unbeliever, it's where you start. Faith in yourself and your abilities, right? In your righteousness and your morality, in the things that you can do. Or if we're a believer, it's where we always kind of drift back to. And they say, why couldn't we drive it out? And I think Jesus at this moment, he could have gone, guys, you never could. That's why you couldn't, because it's not you. It's not you. I don't care what you do. The power doesn't reside in you. It's my power working through you. And you were trusting in what you could do, not what I have already done for you. And so, remember, as a believer, no matter what has been done in the past, this is a good reminder to us, right? Remember, because they've had success in this area. Don't forget, remember, 7 chapters before, he gave them authority, and they had a personal history of doing this very thing. They've had success in this very area of their life. But now, what? They fail. And guys, that could be us. And there's a lot of us in this room right now. We look back and we have a history, right? We have a moment where it all seemed to work and it was all going great. And man, and the faith was working for us, right? It all made sense. And then suddenly we look up one day and we're like, oh, we're still doing the same thing. We're still going to the same church. We're still singing the same song. Why isn't this working anymore? And what's happened is subtly over time, we have shifted our faith away from who he is and what he has done to who we are and what we can do. That's the problem. And so, like I said, suddenly you're frustrated with your faith. Others of you, like I said, you're frustrated with your life. And you're frustrated with your life because you say, well, they don't believe at all. Well, I believe faith is a gift from God. Faith in God is a gift from God, but I still think we all have some version of faith. It's kind of a distorted version of faith before that. It's in ourselves. A lot of people are trusting, like I said, in themselves, in their own morality, their own righteousness, and their own works, and their own religion, and all those things. We trust in ourselves. I'm a good person. I'm a good person. What could God possibly have against me? I'm a good person. And so it's always in ourselves. We always are trusting in ourselves. And you're saying, well, man, I don't know if I can trust. I don't think I can take that trust because how I see it is whenever we are become Christians, right? We cross that line from faith in ourselves, really, to faith in Jesus. It's that transfer of faith where I'm going to stop trusting in what I can do and what I've done. I'm going to start trusting in what he's already done. I'm going to stop trusting in my church attendance. I'm going to start trusting in his death on the cross and his righteousness and his holiness and his resurrection. I'm going to trust in who he is, not in who I am, right? And some of you are like, I can't cross that line yet. That's what I love about this verse. Like, some of you are right now, you're stumbling over that. Like, I can't cross that line of trusting Jesus because, man, I just have so many questions. And I still have all the doubts and the skepticism, and I don't understand it all, right? And you're waiting. And here's the thing. Some of you, you're so intrigued by Christianity, but you're just waiting until you have this fully formed, mature version of faith. You think you've got to wait until you have all the questions answered, all the doubts dealt with, all the skepticism put away, right? You're waiting for a fully formed, fully mature faith. You think that's what you have to have before you cross that line. But I want to point you back to what Jesus said. He said, if you have so much as a mustard seed of faith, what is a mustard seed? Let me tell you what a mustard seed is not. A mustard seed is not fully formed. A mustard seed is not fully mature. A mustard seed is not fully developed. Sometimes it's us just scraping together what little bit of faith we got, and we're going to say, this is all I got right now, and there's not much to it, but I'm going to put it in you. And I don't have all my questions answered, and I don't have all my doubts dealt with, and I don't have all my skepticism put away, but you know what? I'm going to trust that it will be. And I want to put it in you. And I'm just going to follow. And I know some are like, oh, man, I don't know if I can do that. Listen, you don't think you can do that, but you enter in most of your relationships without fully understanding what you're getting yourself into. You hold up. Why is it you're holding up a relationship with Jesus to a higher standard you do with every other relationship, every other agreement, every other contract you ever enter into? We all enter into every relationship that we have, every contract that we engage in, with just a little. We don't have all the knowledge. We don't have all the questions. There's going to be something about it we're going to have to discover. You still do it, though. And I tell you that because you can still do it with him. And I can tell you, I will absolutely let you down. I will disappoint you. I will not live up to your expectations. But I can tell you, with as much honesty and sincerity as I have. He never will. And even though you don't have all your questions answered or your doubts dealt with, he'll never disappoint you. He always comes through. Always. Will you bow your heads with me? Man, my hope today is this. As you just are thinking on this, I ask you to kind of bow your heads, close your eyes. It might feel a little strange. But we just want to carve out a space where we can just think just a little bit, just for just a brief moment, just think a little bit about what does this mean to me now? Where do I go from this point? With what has been said and what I now know, what do I do with this? And if you're a Christian, let me tell you what you could do. You need to recommit yourself to the vigilant effort of guarding yourself against your own faith in yourself. You know, of identifying when you drift back into that and you find yourself just going through the motions. And you need to ask God to show you that, to expose that to you, to stir your affections towards him. And then there are those of you here and you're not a believer, and I'm hoping here's what I would ask you to do is just to consider, man, would you be willing to put your faith in him? Yeah, it's not yet completely done. It's not fully formed. It's not completely developed, not totally mature. But you can say, you know what I do have, what I do know I can trust him, and I'm going to figure out the rest as we go. That's what it's called to be a disciple. We're going to figure out the rest as we go. Could you do that? I would say this. If you are moved to make any kind of step in that direction, I would ask you, take that Connect card out, put your name to it so we know who we're talking to and how we can get in touch with you. And then I want you just to check one of the circles at the bottom or flip it over on the back and just write out what God's doing and what you think God's saying and what your next step should be. And I want you just to let us know, because we can't resource you and encourage you and equip you, and we cannot walk beside you the way we are supposed to until you let us know what God's doing in your life. And I'm going to ask you, just let us know. Please let us know. I believe sincerely God's doing a lot of things in a lot of people's hearts. And our hands are tied until you let us know. So pull that card out, fill that out, drop it in one of those orange boxes, bring it to the Discovery Center. Let's talk. Let's have that conversation. God, I'm praying right now that you give whoever is in this room, whoever is watching online, you would give them all the courage and all the boldness. You would just allow them to take that initial first step, just to fill out that card, that first small step, so that we can have that first conversation. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.